After yesterday, nobody better ask me if there is any common ground to be found with Trump supporters ever again, or anyone in the GOP for that matter, or any Democrats, really. Because the act of terrorism at the U.S. Capitol yesterday should serve as your definitive answer as to why the answer is no, but I know that it won't. Politicians and media pundits are already whining about how this isn't America. We're better than this. We need to and can come together. And they're never going to admit that, yes, this is exactly what America has always been. And there has never been any coming together among the citizens of this country just because the politicians of both parties can pretend to hate each other on the Senate and House floors while they pretend to fight over legislation, then shake hands or bump fists and slap each other on the back and go have lunch and drinks together while they compare their growing stock portfolios while you and I struggle and suffer. Corporate media is now trotting out all these Republicans who are so dismayed at Trump and want him removed. And they're making heroes out of these GOP legislators who changed their vote to challenge the election results in certain states after the riot, saying that, oh, now they're not going to challenge the results. But these are the same people who didn't have a problem with anything Trump did or said for 4 entire years, no matter how racist, sexist, ignorant, and repugnant it was, no matter how untrue, how violent, or how deadly the words and the outcomes were. They went along with him even as people died from the spread of this virus by the hundreds of thousands who just did not need to, and as the police across the country brutalized people defending their right to life, liberty, and due process under the law without the threat of a sidewalk execution by cop, they kept on supporting him. Republicans and Democrats all summer long called anti-racist protests violent, called Black Lives Matter demonstrators thugs and anti-American, cheered the police, assaulting, kettling, running down with cars, beating mercilessly with batons, spraying with chemical agents that are banned in war, and charged with federal crimes people who protested the extrajudicial killing of unarmed people by the police, even as police continue to kill unarmed people across the country. And the media was quick to call the protests riots, played up the isolated incidents of property damage in which no one was hurt or killed, and conveyed the narrative that cities were burning and being set on fire, burned to the ground by Black Lives Matter and Antifa, when that was absolutely not the case. But none of them, not the media, nor Republican, nor Democratic politicians, ever widely reported the right-wing white citizens' violence that was regularly committed against the anti-racist demonstrators, along with the ongoing police brutality, the continued vehicle attacks, the armed civilians intimidating and assaulting protesters with baseball bats and golf clubs, the white supremacists who were actually arrested and admitting to causing some of the property damage, and even to killing cops in California so that it would be blamed on Black Lives Matter. The media, the politicians, the city officials, when they held their press conferences about the protests, almost never talked about the racist white people and their violence against the anti-racist demonstrators. Until, of course, one of them murdered 2 people in Kenosha, Wisconsin. But even then, few wanted to call the presence of armed white people at anti-racist protests what they were: white supremacist domestic terrorists. So today, when these same politicians and media pundits and talking heads express shock that these same kinds of people stormed and terrorized the U.S. Capitol, I call an aircraft carrier of BS on every single one of them. And how are people surprised at the police response, or lack thereof, at the Capitol? We've been talking about how law enforcement is full of white supremacists and class traitors for years. But, us Black identity extremists were, of course, ignored because we're the problem, right? So now there are cop experts and former cops and cop apologists all over corporate media claiming that the lax police presence at the Capitol was the result of law enforcement deciding that they didn't want to make the same mistakes with the excessive police response to the protests over the summer. But that doesn't explain the pictures and videos all over social media of cops opening up barricades and letting the domestic terrorists onto the Capitol grounds, or of them taking pictures and selfies with them, or of the cops calmly chatting with them. It doesn't explain the video of the cop inside the Capitol trying to reason with the horde of angry white men who had just broken into the Capitol, literally broke out the windows, broke into the doors, and stormed in while they scream at him and literally chase him up the stairs. It's odd. Somehow, every one of those cops managed to show a level of restraint in a situation where their lives were clearly in danger, but they weren't so afraid that they shot up the whole lot. Amazing how all it took was a horde of angry white people storming the U.S. Capitol for the police to prove that they do not have to shoot to kill if they fear for their lives all the time. The domestic terrorists erected a makeshift gallows, complete with a noose, on the Capitol grounds yesterday, along with a big old wooden cross, which to me is just the perfect representation of American white right-wing Christianity, or the bastardization of the Christian faith. The Confederate flag was toted around inside the Capitol. That was, to me, also the perfect representation of the white supremacist ideology that this country was founded and built on, that it's tried so hard to ignore and whitewash, but it just kept rising to the fore like mold behind the walls. And I seriously better not hear any more ridiculous talk from liberals or conservatives about cancel culture and how the social justice warriors and too woke crowd hurts your feelings when we point out how excusing, apologizing for, or downplaying racism and oppression is dangerous, because we told you this would happen. Over and over again, we tried to tell you this would happen, and liberals just helped it along by being more concerned about trying to find common ground with conservatives who made excuses for the racists in their midst than with telling the truth. 4 of the domestic terrorists actually were killed during their terrorist attack at the U.S. Capitol. But there seemed to be few arrests made of the people who assaulted police, vandalized and destroyed federal property, broke into a supposedly secure federal building, and threatened legislators. Maybe all that video on social media will remedy that in the coming days. We'll see. Meanwhile, 25 people were arrested in Atlanta Wednesday night, protesting the decision not to file charges against the cop who shot Jacob Blake in the back 7 times. But they weren't arrested for property damage or for assault. They were corralled by the police and arrested for being in the street rather than on the sidewalk. Follow Luke Mon Nation on patreon.com/LukeMonNation for lots of great content.